In this video we're going to discuss solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So the goal of this method is to write the equation in a form where we can then use the square root property. So it needs to be the square of a binomial on one side and the number on the other side. So here's what we want to do. We can do steps 1 and 2 in either order. It doesn't matter whether you do step 1 or step 2 first. Sometimes you might not need to do step 1 or 2. For example, if the leading coefficient is already 1, then that step is done. But we need to make the leading coefficient 1, and we need to make sure that the constant is on the opposite side of the squared term and the linear term. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a number to both sides of the equation so that the left side then factors as the square of a binomial. Let's do an example. Say we have 4x squared minus 8x plus 20 equals 0. Okay, so one of the things that we need to do is make the leading coefficient 1. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. On the left side, that means we're dividing every term by 4. And then we want the constant on the other side, so we're going to subtract 5. Okay, and then here's what we want to do. We want to add a number. We're going to have to add it to both sides to keep the equation equal, but if we add a number to both sides and we choose it in a certain way, then the left side will factor as the square of a binomial. So that number that we want to add to both sides is b over 2a squared. And it doesn't matter whether you go back and use the original b and a from the first step or if you use b and a from this step. You'll get the same thing, since all we did really was divide both b and a by 4 in that first step. So if we use from this point on, b is negative 2 and a is 1. So we're going to add negative 1 squared to each side. So we're adding 1 to each side. So let's do that. So we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals negative 5 plus 1. So it's very important to add it to both sides. That's a common mistake that some people make, is not adding it to the right side. So now we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals negative 4. And then what we're going to do is factor the left side. So you can use your typical factoring techniques if you like, or after a while you might start to recognize what it's going to factor as. So we need two numbers that multiply to negative 2 and add to 1. So that would be negative 1 and negative 1. So I'm going to do grouping. You could do box method or whatever you like here. But when we're doing a completing the square problem, we should always get the same factor twice when you're factoring. Because that was the whole point, was that we want to write the left side like this. So I mentioned in the steps on the second slide that this left side will always factor as x plus whatever b over 2a was. So here, when we did b over 2a, before we squared it, we had negative 1. So that's why we got x plus negative 1, which is x minus 1. So if you start to recognize that, you don't have to do all of this factoring steps here. So now we're at the point where one side is squared and the other side is a number, so we can use the square root property. So we know x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 4. And square root of negative 4 is a non-real number, so we'll want to write that using I. So it's I times the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. Then we'll add 1 to each side so that we have solve for x. So we get 1 plus 2i and 1 minus 2i for the solutions. Okay, let's do another example. So here we have 3x squared plus 24x plus 39 equals 0. Okay, so we want to make the leading coefficient 1. So we're going to divide by 3. And then we want the constant term out of the way, so we'll subtract it to the other side. Okay, and then we want to add b over 2a squared to each side. So b is 8 and a is 1. So we have 4 squared, which is 16. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. And then this is what I was mentioning before. Whatever you squared here, so here we squared 4, that left side's going to factor now as x plus 4. You can check that if you want by factoring or by multiplying this back out. 4 times 4 is 16, 4 plus 4 is 8. So now if x plus 4 squared equals 3, and now we can apply the square root property. Okay, so we are getting real solutions here. They are irrational, so we're just going to write them as negative 4 plus or minus square root of 3. Okay, let's do one more example. Here we have 2x squared plus 6x minus 3 equals 0. So we want the leading coefficient to be 1. So we'll divide by 2. And it's okay if some of the coefficients are not integers. So here we get negative 3/2 for a constant term. That's fine. We still want to add it over to the other side. Okay, so those are our first two steps. Make the leading coefficient 1, get the constant term on the other side. Now at this point, we need to add a number to both sides so that the left side factors as the square of a binomial. So b over 2a squared, b is 3 and a is 1. So 3 squared is 9 and 2 squared is 4. So we're going to be adding 9/4 to each side. So this is one case where it really helps now to know ahead of time how that left side factors. We've seen a pattern. We've seen that it's going to be x plus this number on the left, that quantity squared. So x plus 3/2 squared in this case. You can check that by multiplying it out, and you do get x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. On the right side, we'll need a common denominator to add those together. So we get 15/4. And now we can apply our square root property. So x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus square root of 15/4. So that's square root of 15 over square root of 4, which is 2. And then we'll finish solving for x.